Hi there, I'm Adam from Cardboard Studio. Welcome in the first episode of Let's Make Zombie Survival Game. In this episode, we'll focus on environment. Let's start our epic game development journey. Let's start in Project View by creating the main folder. Change name for something like Zombie Survival Game. Select your folder and drag drop the Scenes folder. Now, let's create few folders. It will be especially useful as our project grows bigger. Create folder for animations, audio, materials, models, prefabs, shaders, and finally textures. Since we made a few changes to our scene, now is a good time to save our project. Go to File and choose Save, or use Ctrl S to save your project. Now go to Scenes folder, select your scene. Press F2 on your keyboard and change its name to Level 1. Great! Let's take a moment to arrange our scene hierarchy. Start by right-clicking on the top element and select Game Object, Create Empty. Change name to Camera and Light. Then hold down Ctrl on your keyboard, click on Directional Light and Main Camera, and drag and drop it onto your new game object. Let's create another game object. Right click and select Game Object, Create Empty. Change the name of new game object to Environment. Although everything seems fine, let's take a moment to check the position of your environment game object. As you can see, we need to reset it. Click on these three small dots and choose Reset Property. Now, we can focus on creating the level environment. We'll start by creating the ground. Select the Environment game object, right-click, go to 3D Object, and choose Plane. Select the Added Plane game object and change its name to Ground. Now, let's change the scale of our ground plane. Focus on the Transform component in the Inspector tab and set the scale to something like 10. Great! As we scale up our plane, we need to use the mouse wheel to zoom out and inspect it. Time to play with materials. Go to our Materials folder, right-click and go to Create Material. Change the name of our new material to something obvious like ground material or just ground. Now, before we start editing the ground material properties, let's assign it to our ground plane mesh renderer, so we can inspect the final view of the material in the scene instead of inspecting it in the folder. Select the ground game object, grab our ground material, and drag drop it as material 0 in the mesh renderer component. As we can see, the ground game object color has changed. Now, by selecting and editing base map color values, we can change the ground game object appearance. Let's choose something dark and brown. Reduce the smoothness level to 0 and continue. Now, let's create the floor of our first building. Select the environment game object, right-click it, go to 3D objects and again select plane. Change the name of the newly created game object to floor. As you can see, the ground and floor are at the same height, so they are intersecting each other and looking weird. Let's increase the Y position of our floor to fix it. Set it to something like 0.01. Now, let's create a new material for our floor. Go to our Materials folder, right-click, and go to Create Material. Set the name to something like Floor. Select the Floor game object, grab our floor material, and drag drop it as material 0 in the mesh renderer component. Choose some color and continue. Now, it's the time to create the walls of our building. We'll make walls from cubes. Select the environment game object, right-click it, and go to 3D object, cube. Change the name of the new game object to wall and inspect it by hitting the F key on your keyboard. As you can see, half of our cube is below ground level. We need to fix it, and we'll do best with using snapping. Click here to check out your snap settings. Fix them to my values if needed. Check out the difference when moving the wall game object normally and when using snapping. Remember to hold the Ctrl key to snap it. This tool is so useful. Now, let's zoom out by using the mouse wheel and change the view orientation by clicking on the Y-axis. Let's create our first prefab. Select the wall game object and drag drop it into the prefab folder. Now, by using the created wall prefab, let's create a building based on the sketch from my notebook. We will start by snapping the wall game object to the grid. Now, let's change the cube scale to best fit the walls of my sketch. We will use the Rect tool to make our life much easier. As we drag the side of the cube, its scale changes. Remember to hold the Ctrl key during the edge dragging to use snapping. Let's add another wall. Select the first wall game object and hit Ctrl D to duplicate the wall prefab. Again, use the Rect tool to change the wall scale and best fit the walls in my sketch. Add another wall. Select the first wall game object and hit Ctrl D to duplicate the wall prefab. Again, use the rect tool to change the wall scale and best fit the walls in my sketch. Repeat this process until the building layout is completed. This will take some time. Now, let's fix the building floor. Select it by clicking in the scene view. Then, still with the rect tool selected, adjust the floor scale to match the building dimensions. Inspect the building in the scene view. Now, let's create a new material for our walls. Go to our materials folder, select the floor material and use the Ctrl D shortcut to duplicate it. Select the floor 1 material and change its name to wall. Change the color to something fancy. Let's change the material on the wall prefab. Go to the prefab folder and select the wall prefab. Now, go to the materials folder and drag drop our new wall material as material 0 in the mesh renderer. Awesome. Now, let's fix these terrible camera settings. Select the main camera game object in the hierarchy. Set the transform position on the y-axis to 15 and rotation on the x-axis to 90. Now, let's move our camera to see our buildings from the top. Finally, change the projection to orthographic instead of perspective. That's all in this episode. Let me know how do you like this content in the comments below, and see you in the next one.